Do you ever go to Tokyo Disneyland? I occasionally go when I have time. Hi everyone, I'm Scott from That's English School. Here is today's lineup. Now, we will start with what is an adverb of frequency. After that, we'll talk about 3 basic grammar points, then a list of the adverbs of frequency. Next, we will give 3 sample sentences of using each one. After that, we will have 2 points of advice. And to finish with today, we're going to have a little interview with Steve where I ask him 10 questions to see how he answers them using these adverbs of frequency. Okay, let's get started. What is an adverb of frequency? Well, basically, they tell us how often something is being done. Now, we have 2 types. We have the definite adverb of frequency and we have the indefinite adverb of frequency. So forget about these ones over here. Let's put them to the side. We're going to be focusing on these ones today. Grammar point 1. Making a sentence. How do we do it? It's very simple. Okay, we need the subject, the adverb, and the main verb. It must go in this order, okay? For example, Steve always eats junk food. Steve always eats junk food. Grammar point 2. Making a sentence using the be verb. In this case, we need the subject, be, and the adverb. Here is an example. Steve is usually happy. Steve is usually happy. Grammar point 3. Making a question. So to make a question in this format, we use do you ever plus the main verb. Do you ever plus the main verb. Here's an example. Do you ever travel abroad? Do you ever travel abroad? This can also be shortened to do you ever? Do you ever? Do you ever travel abroad? Here is a list of the adverbs of frequency we're going to use today. Okay, it goes from 100% all the way down to 0%. Okay, 100% is always. 90% is usually. 80% is normally. 70% is often. 50% is sometimes. 30% is occasionally. 10% is seldom. 5% is hardly ever. And 0% is never. Okay, so let's take a look at some example sentences. 100%, always. I always eat bread for breakfast. She always wears makeup when she goes out. Do you always work at the weekend? 90%, usually. We usually watch TV when we have dinner. I usually check my Instagram before bed. Does your dog usually bark so much? 80%, normally. He normally wakes up at 6:30 a.m. Soccer players normally make a lot of money. Do trains normally run on time in Japan? 70% often. She often makes pancakes for breakfast. I often visit a hot spring when I'm feeling tired. We often eat chilled noodles in the summer. 50% sometimes. Steve sometimes eats oysters. My mother sometimes plays tennis. Earthquakes sometimes happen in Japan. 30% occasionally. I occasionally order a pizza on weekends. My daughter occasionally has a tummy ache. Taxi drivers occasionally get lost in Tokyo. 10% seldom. Brian seldom has an argument with his wife. She seldom shows her feelings to other people. I seldom rent a DVD these days. 5% hardly ever. We hardly ever have cool summers recently. Sarah hardly ever reads books. My wife hardly ever eats rice with dinner. 0% never. I never oversleep. My friend never drives her car. That's English school students never give up. Do you want some advice? Okay. Now there's one adverb of frequency which I almost never hear people in Japan using. Do you want to know which one it is? It's oftentimes. Have you ever heard of this one? Oftentimes. Now this word, oftentimes, is probably more popular in North America. It's not so popular right now in the UK, but who knows what's going to happen in the future. Now, the funny thing about this word, oftentimes, is it's usually used at the beginning of the sentence. Here is a few examples. Oftentimes there are crayons for kids in restaurants. Oftentimes I just have coffee for breakfast. Oftentimes bakeries are sold out in the afternoon. Here is the second piece of advice I have for you. Now, this is about one more adverb of frequency, but this one you know. It is sometimes. So sometimes is a very good word, but my problem with a lot of my students in my class is they only use sometimes. I want them to use a wider variety of different words, but I always hear sometimes. It's too much. So basically, I want you to try and have a wider variety of words. So what should you do? Okay, instead of using the word sometimes, how about using occasionally or now and again? Those are good words. But basically, variety is the spice of life. Okay, now it's time to go and have a chat with Steve. Let's go! Do you ever eat sushi?
Eat sushi, Scott? Yes, often. Yes, my wife and I both love sushi, so we try and go to one of the sushi shops in Moria 2 or 3 times a month. And when we do go, we always eat sea urchins.
Do you ever visit Tokyo Disneyland?
No, I don't, rarely. My wife's family who live in Sendai try and visit us once a year, and then when they come, we always go to Disneyland. So if they don't come, I never go. So usually once a year.
Do you ever go and see live sports?
Again, no, rarely. The last live event I saw was the Rugby World Cup last year. I'd like to go more, but we don't get the time, so probably once a year.
Do you ever forget people's names?
Yes, I do, Scott, always. It's one of my weak points, I'm afraid. I can remember people's faces, but when it comes to saying their names, I always forget.
Do you ever cook Japanese food at home?
No, I don't, no. If I cook, I usually cook something from the UK or Italian, because my wife and I both love Italian food. But if my wife cooks, she always cooks Japanese food.
Do you ever go shopping in Ginza?
Yes, we do, often, yes. We like to go to Tokyo very much. And when we do go, usually once a month, we always go to Ginza to look at the shops or go to the department stores.
Do you ever take a trip abroad?
Again, no, rarely. I try and go to the UK once a year to visit my family, and if we do go, then we try and go to somewhere else in Europe at the same time, so usually once or twice a year.
Do you ever drink beer?
Drink beer? Yes, I do, Scott, often. I really like beer. I'm from the UK and I was brought up drinking beer when I was young, so I always drink at the weekend and sometimes during the week too. I always start off with beer and then usually go on to wine after that.
Do you ever post pictures in social media?
No, I don't, never, no. I'm not really interested in social media, and my family and I have never had the custom to do that, so no.
Do you ever buy things online?
Yes, I do. Often, yes. I like buying CDs and books online, and if my wife and I go on a trip somewhere in Japan, we always make the reservations online, so I'd say 2 or 3 times a month.
Well, how was the interview with Steve? Did you understand what he said? Yeah, he was speaking a little quickly at some points, but yeah, hopefully it was good listening practice for you. Thank you for watching today, and we will see you in the next video.